I'm here to introduce a fellow Dutchman, Jasper Doest. He's a contributing photographer to National Geographic magazine who creates visual stories that explore the relationship between humankind and nature. His series of thought-provoking portraits of Japanese snow monkeys elevated him to public prominence as a rising star of wildlife photography a decade ago, and it got him a World Press Photo Award and a Wildlife Photographer of the Year recognition. The Dutch-based photographer is pursuing a photojournalistic style, inspired by his emotional responses to man's interaction with the environment. Through his photographic work, he shows us the natural world and tries to bridge the gap between the natural world and ourselves. And he invites people to reevaluate their relationship with animals, which is often deeply rooted within our culture. Jasper Doest is a Leica ambassador and lectures for the National Geographic Live series. He has presented at venues as the United Nations Climate Change Conference in Bonn and the Royal Geographical Society in London. He has enormous success with the story about a bird, an intimate story about a flamingo named Bob. And that was rescued by his cousin Odette, who is the veterinarian in Curaçao. A positive story. Jasper is here for you to introduce not just Bob, but also his other work, Jasper Doest.
Thank you, Lars. Thank you, Xposure, for inviting me. It has been a great pleasure being here all week alongside my peers. It's been incredible to be reunited again after 2 years. I have to correct Lars, though, although he left the scene. I'll be only speaking about Bob, but I'll make it worth your while. I would like to take you along to an island called Curaçao, an island just off the northern coast of Venezuela. And let's start by saying that it's early morning, way too early, and I've just started to wake up. It's a moment where a petulant rooster started hollering at 2 a.m. while I was still delirious after 10 hours of transatlantic travel. And to top it off, unwelcome sunlight started to come through the dusty shutters. It's way too early for this, I think, and as I roll over, contemplating if I really need to open up that second eye, 6 feet of rose-colored feathers start flapping in my face. A glorious flamingo is standing by my bedside, and my camera is still in my bag on the other side of the room, and I distinctly remember thinking, no one is ever going to believe me. This flamingo, it made a very unfortunate mistake of crashing against the window of a local Hilton hotel, and it ended up beside the swimming pool. But it was fortunate enough, though, that my cousin Odette, who is a veterinarian on the island and specialized in birds, was around at the time of the incident to rehabilitate him, and she took him to her veterinary clinic to start the rehabilitation process. In case you wonder what linkerpoot means, it's the opposite of rechterpoot, there you go. But seriously, why I'm showing you this X-ray of a flamingo's left foot is because during the rehabilitation process, Odette discovered that the bird had developed arthritis in both of his feet. As you can see here, there is tissue growing around the joint, which makes it impossible for the bird to flex its feet, which flamingos need to do in order to walk. And as flamingos also use their feet during their foraging behavior, doing some kind of backward moonwalk shovel, it can't stir up the crustaceans which they feed upon. So this bird would not be able to forage by itself in the wild. But Odette, being a veterinarian, always has some tricks up her sleeve. It's her job to come up with creative solutions in order to save animals in need. Like she did here with this juvenile flamingo that she rescued. And it came in with a terrible infection between the webbing of its toes. She took it in, she treated the bird, and made these beautiful custom-made slippers that looked adorable, looked incredibly cute. And I had to take a picture of that, after which it was moved to quarantine for several weeks before it was released back into the wild. A big success, but sometimes things are more complicated. Sometimes she's confronted with making decisions between life and death. And when she realized that this flamingo would not be able to be released back to the wild because of its chronic foot injury, she decided to take him in and make him part of her family. One that she shares with 70 plus other animals, I know, including some other rescue birds, living alongside 10 cats and 10 dogs. It's that big heart that I really admire about her, because living in a house with a flamingo can be quite a challenge. But let's stop here for a minute, because when I started to visit Odette 5 years ago, I did not have the same information as I've given you so far. Of course, I knew my cousin. She's my cousin. And of course, I knew she was a vet, but she would always visit me at my house in the Netherlands. So I didn't really have a clue what I would be walking into when I visited my family in Curaçao. The only thing we had arranged was that I would take some pictures of maybe some cats, maybe some dogs, and maybe some of her parrots, and focus on Odette at work to have pictures that we could decorate her veterinary practice with. But everything changed that morning that the flamingo walked into my bedroom. So I'm a photographer. There's a flamingo walking around the house. What do? You start taking pictures, which I did. And I must say that following this flamingo, that in the meantime we named Bob, surpassed my wildest dreams. All I had to do was be present and let the surprises wash over me. Days after our Forge's bedroom rendezvous, I find myself in a car, sitting beside Bob, who's seated on Odette's lap as she drives across the island towards one of the local schools. When we get out of the car, she guides him towards the building, and as he's about to enter the classroom, he stands tall, almost like he understands his new ambassadorial role before he fearlessly makes his entrance. After the conservation summit that we had last week here at Xposure, I don't think I have to explain to this audience the importance of conservation education. But imagine being a 5-year-old and this tall pink bird starts walking into your classroom. Guess what happens? I think you already know the answer. The semicircle of seated grade schoolers explodes in gasps and giggles. Eyes widen in delight and some in horror. Hands clap in excitement, while others tightly hold on to the sides of their chairs. Odette sits down beside a girl that had been hiding behind the door all the time before she pulls up a chair and sits in the middle of the crowd. She talks to Bob while she folds the legs calmly underneath his body and takes him on her lap before she asks who wants to listen to Bob's heartbeat. Hands shoot in the air. She hands the stethoscope to the girl in front of the line and places the diaphragm on Bob's heart. Du-dun, 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 du-dun. Can you hear that? We're both living things, she says. We both matter, don't we? I look through the viewfinder as she continues her education session. But all I can see is the expression on her face while she's looking at the girl. And in that moment, the pride in my chest threatens to explode in a billion pink downy feathers. Her passion and her dedication humble me. You know, my father was born on Curaçao. He and Odette's father are brothers. And for decades, I've longed to explore the land of my heritage. And in that moment, I suddenly realized In that moment, my roots become clear. I come from a family that doesn't mind walking the extra mile in order to help an individual in need. And I see an opportunity to make my contribution. So I continue to follow Bob around on the island, and the story is already getting quite some attention. As Lars mentioned, we gained some success in Wildlife Photographer of the Year, and soon after 2 awards in World Press followed. We even managed to get a featured story on the pages of National Geographic. When that happened, the story of Bob started to take over the world, really. It was difficult to comprehend, but I was getting all the attention. It was all about me, and while Odette loved that her story was being told, she didn't really benefit. So by the time I posted the first picture on the National Geographic Instagram account, it gained a staggering 1.3 million likes. And it made me see that perhaps there was an opportunity to do something back. So I published this book, Meet Bob, which to me is an invitation for all of us to meet Bob. And as all the proceeds are being donated to nature conservation and education on the island of Curaçao, it allows people to help Bob and Odette to push their conservation mission forward. It was published during the pandemic, so unfortunately I couldn't be there, but I received a lovely video clip of Odette receiving the first copy of the book.
Meet Bob is in Curaçao!
You can see how excited she is, but Bob couldn't really care less. He just minds his own business, and he loves hanging out with his friends around the pool. A saltwater pool that Odette has created for him and some other rescue birds that permanently live around her property. They cannot be reintroduced back into the wild because of former injuries. And as flamingos are family birds, they keep each other company. They don't join the schools, as they are not as relaxed around people as Bob is. When looking back at this story, I don't think I've ever worked on anything that came so natural. This situation, for example, we were having this barbecue, and Bob was walking around the pool. And I decided to join him as he entered, and I sat there with him, looking at the lights, looking how he was washing himself, taking in the atmosphere, and feeling the warm summer breeze as the evening continued. I sat there for an hour or so, and when Bob Marley's 3 little birds started to come along on the speakers, it made it the best pool party ever. Days later, I find myself standing in front of a bed filled with cameras to be packed, when I hear Odette's voice coming from the kitchen, asking me if I want to join them to the beach, because they need a break. Minutes later, ominous brooding clouds fill the sky, threatening to offer one of my favorite island treats, a warm afternoon shower. But the azure water is calm. Bob walks over the sand, and his pace picks up as soon as he reaches the shore. And all of a sudden, when he hits the water, his body floats. His body floats in the ocean, bobbing up and down, almost looking like an inflatable pool toy. He dunks his head up and down, he beats his wings as he washes himself, and the water is nice and refreshing indeed. And I decide to dive below, catching a glimpse of those beautiful long legs paddling below the surface. I love seeing Bob like this. He seems so happy, and at the same time, swimming is therapeutic for his arthritic feet. I dive below one more time, just in time to see that school of fish passing by, and I can feel a submarine smile coming over my face. As I drift back to the beach, I look back at this odd couple still bobbing at sea. My brain spins. I see an intimate love story, a story about two individuals that depend on each other, initiating positive change by educating future generations. And as the time runs down towards my flight back to the Netherlands, I start to understand my role here. I thought I'd just come for a visit, but that isn't the case. I have fallen in love with the work of a Wonder Woman and a flamingo, a Wonder Woman that doesn't see how important it is what she's doing. It's just her daily life. But to me, their story is proof that personal initiatives driven by love and empathy can have an enormous impact on the world around us. And I see it as my obligation to tell that story. Thank you.